Hi everyone, it's Christopher, and boy oh boy are we going to learn something new today. All the worry of foundation paper piecing is going to be gone. Poof, just like that. So if you're a beginner and new to foundation paper piecing, follow along. We're going to be making this adorable log cabin quilt block. It's really fun and it's beginner friendly, and I'm going to show you exactly how to make it. Come on, join me. Let's look at the supplies that we need. First, you're going to need a ruler. Now, there's also an add a 1/4 inch ruler out there. It's a really hot pink ruler. You could purchase that, but you could also use the ruler that you have at home already. You're going to need a rotary cutter or two. So I actually like to use two. I use one for fabric specific and then one that's dull for paper. And so I'm going to be using my paper rotary cutter today. A pair of snips to cut some loose threads, some glue. And you're wondering, glue? Really, Christopher? We need glue? Yes, if you're a beginner, I recommend glue, and I'm going to talk to you more about that in a second. You're going to need some thread, and I'm using 50 weight thread. You're going to need a 90-14 size needle for your sewing machine. You're going to need a pencil. Of course, you're going to need your fabric. And then finally, you're going to need foundation piecing paper. And this is by one of our designers, Christy Lee. It's awesome. The quality is amazing. It's 8.5 by 11 and it fits in most of your home printers. All right, I'm going to wipe all of this out of the way and get started. Okay, now that I pushed all my supplies out of the way, I forgot to mention two kind of important supplies you need, and that's your sewing machine and your iron. All right, so what is foundation paper piecing? Foundation paper piecing is the method in which your quilt block or your quilt design is printed on a piece of paper. You use your fabric and your sewing machine to stitch it to the paper. It creates that foundation, and then at the very end, you remove the paper. English paper piecing, on the other hand, is super portable. You don't need your sewing machine for that. You take paper shapes and stitch your fabric around it. Now, both make really intricate patterns and designs. One is more portable than the other, and honestly, foundation paper piecing is super scary, but I'm going to show you how to do it, and you're going to practice and you're going to be a pro in no time. All right, so you've printed your test block, which is the log cabin that we're going to make today. I'm going to show you how I like to find my fabric measurements. Some foundation paper piecing patterns come with it already written and some don't. So I'm going to walk you through how to do it, and you'll see here how I've already done one example for you. Here's how I do it. And I printed off a few extra. I always say that's a really great rule of thumb to have because you might mess up or you might want to write some extra notes down. So when you go to print your pattern, just make sure that you print extra ones. The other thing that's super important before we get to the measurements is to make sure that you pay attention to the 1-inch test block that's on your pattern when you print it. That's because not all printers are the same. Some are different, some are older, some are newer. So what you do is you take your ruler and you go right up against the test block there to make sure that it's truly an accurate 1 inch. If it's not, you might want to adjust your settings and start over. And remember to always print your foundation paper piece patterns at 100%. Okay, so now that I have it printed, we're going to look at this closely. Most foundation paper piece templates or patterns are lettered and numbered, and that just simply means that's the order that you're going to sew your block together. So you're going to sew 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 and etc. So when I go to measure the fabric that I need, I start with the first one, number 1. And because this is beginner friendly, what I recommend is that you cut extra fabric than what you really need. Yeah, it's kind of wasteful, but when you're practicing, you really want to make sure that you nail it. And that's how I did it, because honestly, I was super scared at doing foundation paper piecing at first. And then once I practiced and got the rhythm of it, especially on simple blocks like log cabin, the light bulb went off and I was a rock star at foundation paper piecing. Okay, so we're going to take our ruler. We're going to measure this block here. I usually give myself a 1/2 inch more than what I need on both sides. So for example, here, we are looking at, so I'm going to line up 1/2 inch here and 1/2 inch here. So we're looking at 3 inches is what I need for one side. So I'll write down 3 and then rotate it the same thing. 1/2 inch over, 1/2 inch over on this side, and 3. And that makes sense because this is really a square. And then I keep going until I have the entire thing measured out and ready to go. And here's my example that I have all done. The other thing that I like to do is start to lay out where I want my fabrics to go. And if you're just practicing or trying to get the hang of foundation paper piecing, it doesn't matter. Use fabric that you have in your stash or scraps, as long as they're big enough to fit in the spaces. All right, so I've numbered and mine are numbered, and then I wrote down the fabric that I'm using and then the size of fabric that I need. The other important thing that you'll notice on foundation paper pieced patterns when you print them is there's sometimes a dotted line around the outside. That's your 1/4 inch seam allowance. So when you go to finish your quilt block, it's already built in. Now, there have been a few foundation paper pieced patterns that I've run across that don't have that dotted line. That's okay. Just remember, this is your stopping point. This is your finished block size. So when you go to cut it, and we're going to be looking at cutting in a minute, you'll know that you have to add your 1/4 inch seam allowance around the entire block. All right, so I have everything ready to go, and with the magic of YouTube, my fabric is already cut out. Ta-da! How cute is this? And of course we're going to be doing this in blues. You guys know I love blue, right? All right, so with my fabric cut out, what I've done is I've matched it with my block where I wrote down all the colors that I need. With foundation paper piecing, because you're sewing on the line, your block is actually kind of sort of the reverse. So when you hold it up and you look at it through the light, so I'm looking at it with it facing you guys, cloud is in the middle still, denim is on my right, or I'm sorry, on my left, you know, this thing, and boy blue is on this side, and so that's how I want to lay out where all of my colors are at, so that I know when I go to sew that I just pick those up and I'm ready to go. Okay, so now that we've talked about all of that, and if you're still nervous, it's okay, you know, just take your time. It took me quite a bit to learn how to do foundation paper piecing, but it's super easy. All right, so we have our fabric cut out, we have our template cut out. The next thing that I do is, and I'm gonna put this one to the side because I need that as a reference. I go in and I trim off the excess paper around my block because it'll just be easier for me to maneuver it around the sewing machine. Like this. And I usually give myself another 1/2 inch. That's sort of my rule of thumb to remember, 1/2 inch. I'm gonna throw these on the floor. Somebody will pick them up later. All right. Okay, now I have this ready to go. Glue stick. You were wondering what we were going to do with the glue stick. Well, if you're new to foundation paper piecing and you're super nervous about it, what I recommend is A1. That's the first thing that you're gonna put on your paper. You could put a little dab of your glue stick there and put your paper on, or put your fabric on it. And that way it won't slide or slip. You could also do a pin, but sometimes pins and foundation paper piecing get a little clumsy when you go to your sewing machine. So I recommend a little dab of a glue stick. It'll come right off. Okay, so I'm gonna take my first block, my first little unit here, and I'm gonna hold it up to the light because you're actually gonna be sewing on the lines. The fabric is gonna be on the reverse side. And I'm going to hold it up so that I can see that there's at least a 1/4 inch around this entire block when I go to sew it, so I don't miss any of my seam allowances. And that's the thing that I love about foundation paper piecing is the accuracy is amazing. Okay, so A1's placed. My next block is A2, and so I'm going to reference where I wrote down what color I need, and I need boy blue, so that's this one. And I'm going to place it on top of my white square. Again, holding it up to the light to make sure that I haven't missed anything and that my seam allowance is there, because you want to make sure that you have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And that's why I say it's important for you to have more fabric than you need, because you're going to trim it down anyway. So the more fabric you have, the less there will be for error. Okay, now we're going to take it to our sewing machine. And I've already preset my sewing machine with my 9014 needle, my 50 weight thread, and I've lowered the stitch length on my machine to 1.4. You could do a 1.6 too. But the shorter stitch length will ensure that when you go to rip the paper out, your stitches don't come loose. Okay, and holding everything into place, making sure everything's good to go, I'm going to lower my presser foot. And I'm going to start a few stitches outside of the line, and then I'm going to end a few stitches outside of the line as well. Okay. She's moving slow today. There we go. And all you're doing is stitching right on top of the line. Okay, stop a few stitches after, and that just catches all those seams. Give it a quick cut. All right, so there you have stitched your first line. Congratulations. And then I'm just going to snip away my excess thread there. Okay. Now what you can do is you're going to fold back where you just stitched, give it a nice crisp fold of the fabric there, and then you're going to take your ruler and you're going to find your 1/4 inch mark on your ruler, or if you're using the add a 1/4 inch ruler, that works great as well because it's already built in and you can see it. And then all I'm going to do is trim. And see, not too much waste there. All right, now there's a couple ways you could do this. You could finger press this back, but I love crisp seams in my blocks. So what I do is I take it to my iron, and I have no steam in my iron. I've cut the steam function off. I'm not using my little spray bottle, nothing. You don't want any of that because the paper could curl, but because we're using Christie's foundation piecing paper, it's not going to curl. It's great quality. And this I have on a high setting. I'm going to give it a good press. Sometimes I get a little carried away and do a little ironing. You don't want to do all that. Okay. And then we're going to continue. So now we're going to look for number 3. So number 3 is here for me. And number 3, again, is boy blue. So we're going to take that. And we're going to look up. We're going to flip it over and make sure that we're capturing that 1/4 inch seam allowance on all sides. So I want to make sure there's a 1/4 inch here, and then I want to make sure there's a 1/4 inch here and here. That way when I go to sew these sections on, that it all catches. So I think we're good to go. Give this a little reposition. The other helpful tip is if you're super nervous about looking at it through a window or a light, you could get a light box. We have an awesome light box by Lori Holt. You could use that. That'll help you be able to see your 1/4 inch seam allowances as well. Okay, so back to my sewing machine. Put my presser foot down. Again, starting a few stitches outside. Sewing right on that line. Stopping a few stitches out. Cut my thread. Come on, scissors. Okay, fold the paper back. Take my ruler, find my 1/4 inch mark. Throw my scraps away, come to my iron, push that back, give it a nice press. Okay, and then if we go back to our first block that I showed you, you can see now that it's starting to take shape. So here's our center squares, and here's the first 2 sections of our log cabin. Super easy, right? Okay, well, I'm going to keep going and stitching around my log cabin super fast, super speed mode. You guys follow along at home on your own speed. It's awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to put on my last strip, and I wanted to point out to you, oh, sorry, were you dizzy from all that fast sewing that I was doing? Sorry about it. All right, so I wanted to point out that when you get to your outside ones, you actually want to sew way past your 1/4 inch seam allowance. That's just something I do. I think it secures the whole block a little bit better. But as you're practicing, just go ahead and stitch outside the lines. And if the foundation paper piece template that you printed doesn't have this dotted line, just imagine that there's a invisible 1/4 inch seam allowance there and just keep sewing for a minute. It's not going to hurt anything. Okay, so now I'm going to put on the last one. Number 9. I think that's right. Okay. All right, I'm gonna trim off these extra threads that I had in here. It's not necessary, but if you have a lot of light fabrics when you're foundation paper piecing, you probably wanna go ahead and get rid of them. Use my blue snips because we're using blue fabric, what? Okay, my last trim here. Excuse me, goodbye. Okay, give this a good press. Might be cutting it close there. We're gonna see. Get a little wonky. Okay, and as you can see, here is our block. It matches this one here beautifully. It comes together really quick too. Okay, so now you have to trim this to get it down to 6.5 inches. So all you do is flip it over, and you want to make sure that everything is nice and flat, that your fabric doesn't get caught underneath like this, because that wouldn't be a lot of fun, because you'd have to rip it out. So everything feels nice and flat. So I'm just going to take my ruler, and I'm not going to trim on this line. That's actually our finished quilt block line. I'm going to trim on this dotted line. And like I said before, if there's no dotted line, you want to make sure that you still trim 1/4 inch away from that solid line. So put that there. I think foundation paper piecing is like coloring. You stay in the lines. Keep going. And this is where you could use a rotating cutting mat. We have an awesome one by Sue Daly. Keep going. One more. Okay, there she is. There is your log cabin foundation paper pieced block. How glorious is she? You guys did it, right? It's so not that hard. Practice on easy blocks like log cabin or like flying geese. Angles sometimes get a little bit tricky, but I think you guys could do it. You could also do the square in a square or the economy block. There's so many awesome foundation paper piece templates out there. Okay, but what about the paper? What are we gonna do with this paper? Well, some quilters love to keep it in as they're putting the quilt together. If it's something simple like the log cabin block, you can go ahead and remove the paper. And all you have to do is turn it around, and you're gonna remove the paper in the opposite direction of which you sewed it. So you're gonna start with number 9, fold it back, give it a little crease, and just rip it out. Go to number 8. And this is really fun. You could get your grandkids or your kids involved. You could sit and binge watch your favorite television shows. Okay, there we go. There is our finished log cabin block. You guys did it. I'm so proud of you. All right, well, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you again soon.